Sweet souls and demons swarming this portal. Something odd has happened. I left my portal cracked for just a moment longer than normal, and something or someone slipped in. He has a bone face and an educated manner about him. The man calls himself Dr. Creepen, and he has offered to say a word or two tonight. So enjoy this wonderful tale, exclusive only to this portal, forged by Detective Romwell, or otherwise known as Author Jojo. So sit back with your favorite drink and listen. Hallowed be thy stars. If it wasn't for my daughter, I don't know that I would have looked at the stars the way I do now. When she was young, she loved nothing more than laying in the backyard and pointing up at those pinpricks of white, hanging countless miles above our heads. Her love for them was infectious. She would ask me to buy her black construction paper so she could press the tip of white-colored pencils into it to mimic the lights in the sky. We spent the day putting all her paper up on the ceiling so, even in the middle of the day, she could see the stars. My daughter was full of wonder like that. She was so focused on the sky, she never had time to look towards the ground. My little stargazer. My consciousness slowly fluttered back to life. While my vision was still blank, I could hear a constant hiss, like a snake or carbonation seeping from a fresh bottle of Coke. Cold and lively air filled my lungs, shocking the rest of my senses into action. I felt my eyes shoot open like I had just woken from a horrible dream. Reaching out, my fingers laced the side of the slim pod that had been housing my body as cool air plumed out. A glass encasing before me continued to rise as the interior of the small room filled with similar-looking pods was revealed to me. I didn't know how I expected it to feel when I exited hypersleep. I thought that it would be painful or jarring. In the end, though, it felt just like waking up in the hospital after surgery. Nothing more than a groggy hangover. Leaning forward to get a better view of the room, I quickly noticed Connor standing to my left. His fingers were the ones that puppeteered my exit of stasis. I'm sure it didn't look like my Sunday's best, but his eyes were heavy. He looked ragged and tired. Connors, how long have you... My question was cut off when he quickly raised his finger to silence me. His hands were shaking and I couldn't help but hone in on specks of red that tainted his flesh.
We weren't supposed to leave.
His voice was haggard. There wasn't a hint of the bright and smooth anticipation his words carried when we first departed on our mission. Before I could press him any further, he continued, almost as if he read my mind, or rather, he had no care for my interaction with him.
Our simplistic lives were never meant to reach outside of the horizon. There's nothing for us out here, Captain. There's nothing out here.
He backed away from the pod, and that's when I noticed the lack of symmetry in his body. His left arm presented an alarming vacancy for a limb that caused bile to retch in my chest. The bone was still there, but it was utterly unrecognizable as such. It was as if someone took a cheese grater and worked at the flesh until the blades went dull. Connors, what is going on? Look at you! I shouted, pulling myself completely from my extended bed rest. We stood apart from one another, and it became difficult to look into his eyes. There was something else behind them that I strained to see. It wasn't physical, but I could sense something in his gaze that rattled my sense of safety.
What's going on, Captain?
He said back to me, almost mocking my concern by echoing the words in monotone.
God does not exist out this far, Captain. Everything that lays beyond our paltry little home is greater than such a thing. We can never understand it, and so there is nothing.
His words were capped off by a malicious smile.
We are far from humans.
He spoke, turning around and stumbling further away from me. I could hardly keep my eye off the mangled arm of his swaying freely as he took one step after another. Small beads of red pinging off the metallic floor, leaving a trail of breadcrumbs through the door and into the hallway where he retreated. Once I lost sight of him, I could still make out the sound of his boots clunking against the floor, and then a laugh. Connors began laughing in the hallway, his voice bouncing around the corner and filling the small room like water. His voice bouncing up and down until eventually the expulsion of air continued, and before I knew it, his laugh had twisted into a howl. A scream that continued climbing in volume and started to chop. It was like Connors' voice was struggling to buffer on a subpar internet. I could almost hear him screaming underneath his scream, layered on top of each other. Somehow Connors' scream had become a chorus of infinite cries, all shifting in pitch and consistency. I placed my hands over my head to block out the sound that was making my stomach churn. Then, it was over. When the sound stopped without warning, the silence became almost just as troubling. I could have stood there forever trying to collect myself if I hadn't felt the warm trail of liquid caressing my fingers. Pulling my hands from my ears, I saw faint pools of red collected under the nails that had dug into the side of my head when I had attempted to flee Connors' final human act. I let myself sit in silence for a moment, waiting for anything to disrupt it, trying to think of what had happened to Connor before committing myself to finding out for sure. It wasn't just my immediate surroundings. The whole station must have grown silent since I returned to my slumber. No distant chatter or beeping from equipment requiring attention. It all felt so still, like I was hanging in time. On Earth, there are so many sources of noise that you have little control over, but on the station everything was controlled. If we wanted silence, we would have silence. A light thud of my footsteps filled the room as I cautiously stepped forward, bracing myself for whatever may lay beyond my vision. As I moved, I occasionally caught sight of the windows I passed by. Connors was right. Every window offered the same view. Distant white specks representing stars so far away from us that, without hypersleep, I'd never meet. It's isolating. We are far from human. Placing my hand on the doorway, I looked over at my fingers. The red from under my fingernails seemed to continue flowing, and I wondered if I'd lifted the nail when I was clenching. I was just trying to distract myself, though. The view behind my fingers was not one I wished to observe. In the distance, I saw a huddled mass laying on the floor. With my approach, the details of the mass revealed themselves to me. Connors' body hardly resembled a body anymore. His limbs were twisted and bone poked out from various pivots in its destroyed frame. It looked like he had been dropped from a helicopter and smacked cement after terminal velocity had been met. He was a cruel and distant display of what a human should look like, and worst of all was his head. Most of the features on his face had remained intact, his mouth still pried open, mimicking a scream long after his demise. His eyes, though glassy, were staring far off. They made me feel like he was looking through the hull and into space, as if, even before his passing, he was looking into the darkness for some reprisal, in search of anything human. I can't help but wonder what he saw out there. Above his eyes, however, his scalp had been scraped away. It looked very similar to how his damaged arm did. Hunks of pink and trails of red replaced what should have been a smooth veil of plush flesh. I could see small pockets of smooth white underneath the mess, just small pinpricks of white. I am unsure why I felt so calm. Perhaps calm isn't the right word, but the natural reaction would be to be steeped in fear, and yet I was not. Still, more than anything, I felt the uncomfortable silence slipping through my pores and swimming throughout my body. Just as I was longing for any noise outside of the ones I was producing, I heard a bang. It's hard to tell where a sound is coming from when you're just surrounded by small rooms and hallways, but I did my best to make my way towards it. I thought about trees. I thought about what the noise I heard could be. If I never sought out the source, would it ever be anything? If a tree falls in the forest and no one is there, does it make a sound? As I walked through the halls, I thought the obvious answer would be yes. But if there's no one there to perceive something, can it make a sound? Is that tree in the forest even there if no one is there to witness it? The mere observation of something is what gives it shape and purpose. I can never know what a thing looks like when I'm not looking at it. If a tree somehow falls in space, however, it will fail to make a sound, even to those observing. Sound does not penetrate the stars. The light smack of what I'm hearing on the ship only exists because I am there to hear it. Its existence is dependent on mine. I wonder if that's why Connor woke me up before his final moments, so he could exist. Finally, I reached the final barrier, and of course it was another door, another corner I had to turn. And owing to some weak feeling of curiosity, I turned that corner. Then, through the invisible barrier, I saw the source of the noise, and while questioned or answered, my comprehension was thrown into trial. As the captain, I'm ashamed to admit I can't remember the exact amount of people who embarked on the journey into the stars with me. But looking into what was the mess hall, long metallic tables lined by cushioned metal chairs, plates of half-eaten food still resting. Whether the food was still warm or had grown cold was not my concern. My concern was that if I was about to do a head count of the bodies I saw in the room, even with my vague knowledge of how many there was supposed to be, I'd come to find there were far too many. One head in particular caught my eye. Rather, it demanded my attention. Like it had drilled nails through my boots and into the floor, I found myself unable to budge. In the middle of the mess hall, standing on top of a small mound of motionless bodies, was something not of my understanding. I could only seem to see the parts of it that were relevant. It didn't matter what its legs or body looked like. It did matter, however, what its hand looked like as it clutched one of my crew on my ship. His body was motionless like the others, but regardless, the creature hooked its slender and shaking digits around the crew member's collar. The creature held him up to its head, which was also relevant. Almost seemed fake, the way particles drifted off of the crew member's face, and I came to understand what had happened to Connor's body. Bits of flesh left the crew member, revealing the pink interior underneath. Particles kept coming off his face until small bits of white bone were revealed like stars in the darkness. From those white spots, I watched a liquid-like substance appear. Threading through the bone in pink, the translucent liquid was pulled into the creature's mouth. I watched the creature open its maw and drink up the ever-colorful liquid. It was almost like a television screen was being played, and the liquid-like memories and emotions were entangled. They were all being taken away slowly, leaving nothing but empty gray matter. All those memories, all those events, and things that the crew member was there to see. I wonder which ones he was the sole witness to, which ones were gone forever, ceasing to exist, plucked right from reality, all into the jaws of that thing that barely plagued the crevices of my vision. It looked like an aged film, like it was barely taking form. I could just hardly see the rigid rows of teeth that shuddered as it received its meal. I could barely make out the dark eyes with a bright yellow circle in the middle of them. The eyes looked like black holes with light bending around them. The rest of its body was a haze, like when you strain your eyes for too long and try to look away. I want to say its body was blue, but at the same time, when I think of its color, there is no word I can use to define it. If there is a God on earth, he does not traverse past the horizon, and whatever is beyond is not the work of him. This thing was beyond the horizon, beyond God, and most certainly beyond me. The more I watched the man's face being pulled into pink mush, the more I recognized him somehow. the more I recognized all the bodies in that room. All wearing the same clothing, all adorning the same pattern of damage over and over again, so much that it seemed surgical. The creature stood on top of a mountain of different me's. All those lifeless and motionless figures were mirrors of myself. I don't know how that's possible. How could I? But I know those bodies were my own. Where was the rest of the crew? I found that the nails finally lifted from my feet and I was able to back away, trying not to alert the creature that clearly liked whatever it got from me. How many times did I die at the hands of that thing? Did I experience those deaths, or was it some distant consciousness of mine? Do I exist in multiple capacities outside the realm of God? Fleeing the mess hall, I made a frantic dash, looking through any room I could for any source of life other than that thing. Each room was empty, until they weren't. Until one after the other would discover the fates of the crew. Bodies sat, ripped apart in their bunks or laying in the middle of the hallway, each one suffering the same wounds. The only distinct modifier being the name tags hanging by their collars. It didn't even look like a fight was ever put up. They just sat as the tree fell and let everything be pulled away from them. This ship is a goddamn forest. An ever-expanding machine-guided mass grave, floating so far away from any of our families. Turning the corner during my hectic search, my eyes suffered a familiar glaze, and I saw the creature, or whatever represents it in physical space, standing at the other end of the hallway. As if time was skipping forward, the thing's position changed, and it got closer to me without any movement. Then again and again until I felt the dread bubble into my heart so fiercely, I turned around and went running away. Feet pumping from the impossible threat, I noticed to my sides the once lifeless bodies stood up. Their faces still all mashed and damaged, but they watched me run by them with eyes that had been long since ripped away. They were alive at that moment. The state of their atoms altered under my observation, and for a brief moment, I was a necromancer manipulating the dead. I could hear the wet thudding of the creature behind me, or maybe I was attributing the previously heard noise to its form in an attempt to concrete its being. Turning one more corner, and like time skipped forward, the creature was there despite all the distance I had created. I saw long, clutching fingers grip the collar of my shirt, and looking into that great, blue uncertainty before me, I felt powerless. I thought of my kid, the wonder she would feel in her final days. I let her stay up as late as she could, staring at the stars. She would ask me if that was where she was going, if it was nice up there. I told her it was beautiful up there. Was my feeling one of fear as the creature pulled me closer to those teeth, as I felt small flecks of flesh lift from my face, my sense of self pile driving into the unknown? She must have felt it when my baby girl's vision started to wane. She was too weak to pull out of bed, so we laid there staring at the pictures of the stars we had drawn. My body being pulled away felt a lot like losing her did. Like there was nothing after it. You're just left with those bits that were taken from you. More and more of me vanished into the thing's mouth as my vision went black. As I thought of her, as I thought of the pile of me's in the mess hall, as I thought about the taste in my mouth. It was a sweet taste, something like cotton candy or movie theater popcorn, and suddenly I felt that I could open my eyes. My eyelids pulling apart like window shutters, I looked at the figure in front of me, the lump of flesh that used to be its face. I looked at the figure's collar, and right next to my clenched fingers I read the name tag. The words Captain gleaming brightly at me. I released the figure with my stomach feeling filled, and my memories clattering through my head. Memories of the other crew members, memories of seeing myself enter the mess hall over and over again, until the punch of killing myself became meaningless. It was all meaningless out here. when you aren't being observed, when you're on a ship so far away from humans, the governors of reality and stable mass. Nothing has to make sense anymore. You're a tree falling in the forest. Your light so far away that no one even knows you're on. So are you on? I walked to the window. Looking at the darkness dotted with small white lights, I wondered where the earth was. And then I wondered, why did Connor wake me? He was only supposed to wake me when we returned to... Is that what happened? Did we fall so far out of course? Did the instruments fail us and lead us further from Earth? But why not wake me sooner so I could navigate? So I could do anything? How did all of this happen? A madness only spreads without hope. Yet all these windows had to offer were stationary lights. Like the ones my daughter faded to. Time, reason, physics, they all fell apart in the confines of this ship, and I fell along with them. There was no monster left, no crew left. Only I, with a mouthful of my past embodiments, remained. Exhausted and full, I reached out to the window and placed my hand against, reaching for the depths of space to take me. The window was gritty, not at all the smooth gloss I expected to feel. When we reached our destination, I was put back into hypersleep and Connors was to wake me upon reaching the earth. And he had done so. But when did I truly wake up? When did I truly go to sleep? There was no way Connors would have waited until nearly everyone was gone to wake me up. The original me. Am I him? What did he do? Did he succumb first when the instruments told us we'd reached Earth, yet it was nowhere to be seen? My fingers ran along with the fine grit of the window as I heard memories of madness silk through the ship. Everyone felt so lost and uncertain. The fabric of the walls we built started to fall, and unreality seeped in. Poisoned the ship. Poisoned me 100 times over. All those people and no one thought to check the windows. All that frantic work I did to try and calm everyone down must have pushed the memories out of my head. Maybe it was hypersleep, but it didn't matter anymore. Pressing harder, my fingernails sunk, shallowing into the dark view presented by the windows, and I thought of our embarking moments. I thought about how broken up I still was over my daughter's death. I brought them with me to remember her by, so we could take her stars with us. So I'd always remember her love for them. I cut the picture up. Pulling my fingernail down slowly and hearing a tear ripple through the ship, ripping at the corners of my mouth until it had twisted up into a smile. When we left for this journey, I had cut up her pictures and put them on the window so I could always look out and see her stars. And behind those stars now, after everything had fallen, it was a great and blue marble of human civilization resting just moments of re-entry away. What was left? All I could do was laugh. Laugh at how silly it all was. All that loss of life and hurt. All we had to do was take the fucking pictures down. Earth had been there all along, just waiting for us to come home. I was a tree, fallen on the floor, laughing my ass off. I wonder if God could hear me.